Hello everyone, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make the Archangel PVE, also known as the Gale PVE I recently progressed. In my opinion, this is the best generalist PVE in the game, because it's good for literally everything. For example, while getting hit and not using an Ishin's ring, I've managed to kill Primadon in under a minute multiple times, as well as clearing Ferryman in 30 to 40 seconds. Not to mention, if you get good enough at this PvE build, you can even one-cycle Chaser, as I've seen others do it in the past. So yeah, this PvE build is pretty crazy in terms of damage, but I didn't mention that it has Brick Wall, so that means this build is also pretty good for hell modes as well. As long as you can occasionally parry squibbos, you can use it for that as well. I've made a full progression video on this build, where I went from power 1 to 20 in 3 hours completely solo, which is incredibly fast for a PvE build this good. The build was originally created by MX from the Drowned PvE hub, so make sure to support the original build creators. But today I'll be showing you the best stat order for this build to help you progress at first try and as quick as possible, and I'll be showing you how to use this build to its fullest potential. Alright, hopping over to the build maker. For this build, you ideally want to go with Vesperian, just because of the innate starting stats. Although realistically you can go any build as long as it has starting stats in either Fortitude, Agility, or Willpower. For the Oath on this build, you're either going to go with Oathless or Dawnwalker. We only really go Dawnwalker for Blinding Dawn for Ferryman, although if you don't plan to sweat that hard on Ferryman, you can just go Oathless as a much easier alternative. Plus I like to use this for extra mobility slots. For your Origin, we're going to go Deepbound. I actually progressed this build as a Vow of Thorns, which made progression way faster. You can do it on this build easily, since you can wish to escape depths with Young Shoal, or farm idols from Ferryman to escape depths. For your Bell, since it's a mage build, none of these bells really help out, although I'd say the best is either Sacred Field or Run It Back. Personally, I'd say you go Run It Back for a more generalist option. For your outfit, we're gonna go with Prophet's Cloak for the 25% extra Mantra Pen. Now the Mantra Pen this provides is a little overkill on this build, since in total I believe we're getting around 85% Mantra Pen. For those of you who don't know, without Ether Overdrive, it actually caps out at 50% I believe. However, you won't have the Piercing Will talent active in Hell mode, therefore it's nice to have a Prophet's Cloak to always keep your damage at the highest it can go. Anyways, your boons and flaws on this build, I went Autodidact and Scrapper just to make it easy to progress, and my flaw was simple. Off Shrine of Order, I ended up getting Glutton, which is the perfect flaw for this build since we get Carnivore. Obviously, you don't pick Glutton at the start of the build. Anyways, for your starting stats, I went 10 into Gale Breath, since it's the only achievement on this build. Then I just dumped as many points as I could into Willpower and Fortitude, and these should be the final stats that you end up with. To start off with, I immediately went to 50 Fortitude for Reinforced, Exoskeleton, and to the finish. Then I went for 40 Agility so I could meet the requirements for Conditioned Runner and Ghost early. Then 30 Willpower for Bastion cards. Then I went back to 100 Fortitude, which actually only took me a couple minutes if you've seen the progression. From there, you just go 100 Willpower. Very important, before you Shrine of Order, you want to get Heretic Sutra, since you have more than enough Willpower. You don't want to forget this, since you can't do it post-Shrine. Anyways, you just put your last stat points into Charisma and Intelligence, and these are the stats that you're going to Shrine of Order with. The leftover points that you'll have from Shrine of Order can go into anything. So immediately after Shrine of Order, I went straight to 40 Charisma for some very useful damage resistance and damage buff talents. Then I went into 5 Strength so I could get Carnivore on this build. And finally I went to 82 Gale Breath. These are very simple stats, but we get a lot of very strong and useful cards. For your traits, it was 3 Vitality, 3 Erudition, and 6 Song Chant. This gives you a good spread of high damage, ether recovery, and health, so it's super good. Now hopping over to the talents, we meet the requirements for a lot of advanced cards. On this build, all that you really have to go is Conditioned Runner, Reinforced Armor, Ghost, and Brick Wall. Not a Scratch is purely optional. Conditioned Runner provides free healing, Reinforced Armor provides pen reduction, Ghost is just a useful talent in general, and Brick Wall is super useful in Hell mode since you can't ragdoll. Now, this build goes Perfect Flash. This is a pretty hard card to use, since if you're not getting hit, your mantras are dealing 25% more damage, which is insane. Although if you get hit, this goes away. So this means it's good for quick boss fights like Chaser, Primadon, and Ferryman. Then we ended up getting Carnivore. This is to give us infinite hunger. You can get Grand Support if you want, although this card is purely optional and I chose to skip it. But next we got Fishman, Exoskeleton, To the Finish, Neuroplasticity, Piercing Will, and Thresh Claws. This little group of mantras provides a lot of extra pen, HP and damage reduction, and Neuroplasticity gives you an extra wildcard slot, which is super useful in any build. Now you can go Silencer's Blade, although I'm not sure how this works with Spectre Path, so if it's bugged, don't go it, but if you see it and there's nothing else to pick, then I'd highly recommend it. Next we go Golden Tongue. You see, there's a little bug most people don't know about. You can stack the green reinforced with the yellow reinforced from Golden Tongue to essentially get double the damage buff from reinforce, which is super cracked. Then I got Blood Iron Spirit, as well as Speed Demon and Scuba Drowner, and this caps out the rares. Next I got Kickoff. This is just a useful talent in general. Then you can get Grand Feast if you want. It's another very useful card to have. Then I got Giant Slayer and Underdog, as well as Tough Love. These provide a ton of extra damage to your mantras and M1s. Mantra Permanence is very useful for Hell mode since it can recover ether very fast, although it's less useful if you plan to use this build to kill bosses. We end up unbounding our Gale Breath for free and getting Master Gale Breather, so that's plus 15 health right there. You will see a lot of extra talents purely because of stuff like this, but don't worry, the talents are very easy to get on this build. Next I got Inhale and Aftercut for the extra damage and the ability to storm mantra modifiers. Wind Step is always useful for the extra free mobility it provides. Old Habits Die Hard and breathing exercises are a free plus 10 HP on this build. Then we're going to take Ether Kit and Health Pack, as well as Armor Conserver, since in Hell mode and Etheron you don't want to run out of armor durability. You can go Total Shell on this build if you want, which I highly recommend for Hell mode, as it's essentially free damage reduction. Now you want to go Spectre on this build. One, because the white wind it provides you looks pretty cool, and because in PVE I believe it's a little bit better because of apparitions. Then you go Unfazed and Grasp on Reality, so you suffer next to no downsides from using Heretic Sutra. And then for your final card you want to go Maestro's Blade, just to add a little bit of extra damage to your M1s. Now the final talents does say 51, although you've got to remember there is stuff like Gale Breather stuff which you get automatically. So in reality this build only has around the mid to high 40s in talents, which is pretty obtainable. Of course I am going to go through and just add the extra quest talents to this build, just so you can see how many stats you can be expecting on the final summary of this build. Obviously this does pad out the talent count a little bit, but don't worry, since this build is very easy to get, and I even did it on my first try, if you exclude the time I accidentally put Strength pre-shrine. Anyways, hopping over to the mantras, you immediately want to get Tornado. This is your main damage dealer on this build and can shred through most bosses. Next you want to go Gale Lunge for movement, Gale Trap for the free damage it provides, as well as Gale Punch and Astral Wind for high burst damage options. Next I want Wind Passage definitely, since this mobility mantra is incredibly useful. Then for your support mantra I recommend Taunt just because it provides the extra 10% damage buff. And now the final mantras just depends on what you want. If you're doing layer 2s, then Dash and Shoulder Bash are 100% recommended, although if you are doing Hell mode, then something like Pillars of Arisia is super useful for AoE damage. So it's really up to you on what you want to choose. Now coming over to the weapons. On this build, we're obviously going to be using a 3-star damage Hero Blade of Winds. While your M1 damage isn't super high on this build, we're going to be using a Ring of Casters and an Ishin's Ring to buff it up a whole lot. And then of course we're going to use a Willpower and Charisma Ring just for that little bit more damage on your M1s. Obviously, while it may say 140% damage to your mantras, we're actually getting something like 150 to 160, just because of the extra mantra pen we get, and Ring of Casters providing an extra 10% to our mantra damage. Now let's quickly look at the summary, and you can see we are gaining a ton of health on this build, getting 152 in total, which means this PvE build is incredibly tanky, so I'd highly recommend it if you want an easy to make and fun PvE build to learn bosses on. Obviously, of course, we're getting a ton of extra ether, tempo, and ether regen, as well as a fair amount of elemental intensity on this build, so yeah, it's pretty strong. I forgot to mention it earlier, but if you do want, you can go Blind Seer on this build since you do meet the requirements, just because Blind Seer is a very useful oath for Hell mode since it provides extra defense, although Oathless or Dawnwalker in my opinion are better generalist options, since this build is meant to be good at everything. Before I get the question, is this Archangel PvE build better than my Godslayer v3? Well, not exactly. This build is substantially easier to progress, and has far better times when it comes to stuff like Ferryman. Although I still believe my version 3 is better, this PvE build is an incredibly good option if you want something a lot easier to progress and don't want to lose a lot of stuff when you wipe. Plus, this build, like I said before, can do Hell mode if you're decently skilled at it. Anyways, now we're going to go over how to properly use this build to its fullest limits, making sure to get the very most possible damage out of all your mantras. There's only a few simple techs that I like to use on this build. The first is Gale Trap into Tornado. Seeing as you can't M1 or use other mantras while using Tornado, since Gale Trap stays around for a while, you can stack both to do a lot of single target damage to an enemy. The next major trick is inhaling Wind Passage before you cast it. If you put 3 perfect and 3 crystal lenses on Wind Passage, you can make it go incredibly far when you inhale. Of course, on this build, you want to be perfect casting all your mantras just so Haunted Gale and Apparitions proc all the time. And the final major trick to this build that'll help get you the most possible damage is using a Blessed Gem on Tornado and an Insignia Gem on both Astral Wind and Gale Punch. This will let you cast Tornado and Gale Trap as fast as possible, leading to a whole lot more damage, since Tornado is able to melt most mobs in the game. If you're wondering for the rest of your mantras, just put blue gems on them, since while this build has a lot of ether, there's no harm in saving even more ether through blue gems. Anyways, this has been the Archangel PvE build showcase. Make sure to check out the progression if you want to see how I progress this build personally, and make sure to support the original build creators as well. I'll have their Discord linked in the description. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed. Make sure to like and subscribe and check out some of the PvE content, and I'll see you next time.